All right. Again, thank you for being here for our Summer FCI Live 2023 series. And this is kicking off our second week with using visual timelines. And this is the only one that I will be leading. And with my colleague Melanie Shelto from Firebrand Cooperative, we'll go over what we'll be covering in just a minute. Quick bits of housekeeping, please check that you are muted. Check right now. Make sure you're on mute because it really messes with the sound when everyone isn't muted, and we're recording these sessions so they can be shared with those who weren't able to make it and with those in the future who need this content. Thanks so much. The number one question I get asked is if these will be recorded and how I will access them. Yes, every FCI Live session is being recorded this series, and we will have those up on Monday, July 3rd. You will receive an email the afternoon of Monday, July 3rd, showing you give links, showing you exactly where you can find those videos. So absolutely, you will have access to these. We will have them out right after the session, right after the series is complete that Monday. Okay. And still letting folks in, more folks showing up. And real quick, a shout out to our champion sponsor for FCI Live, which is the National Co-op Grocers, for making this session possible. We really appreciate them for helping us put on this summer series. And with that, again, I'm gonna check everyone is muted. Please make sure you are. And we're gonna start our session on using visual timelines. And I know you can't really see her at the moment, depending on your page setup, but I want to say hello to Melanie Shelito from Firebrand Cooperative. Thanks for being here today, Melanie. If you can see her, Melanie, can you wave? Say hi. Okay. Did she wave? Okay. Melanie's going to join us in the second half of the session. She built the template that I'm going to eventually show you. We're going to talk about what timelines are, why use them, how to use them a little bit. And then Melanie's going to show you the template we asked her to work with us to build, that is something that you can actually put your own co-op's information into, your own logos on, change, and utilizes a tool for your own cooperative. So she's generously offered to join me today to show you kind of the nitty-gritties of actually how to use that tool. So we'll be getting into that in the second half of the session. All right, so let's jump in. I'm going to try to move this bar so it doesn't in the way. Okay, so we're here to talk about timelines and what do we mean by a startup food co-op timeline. So timelines are a map of all the major milestones that have to be reached in the different stages to get to opening your food co-op. Pretty simple, pretty direct. There are two kinds though. There's your internal timeline and your public timeline, okay? And so the internal timeline is very, very detailed. It's broken into numerous columns and areas of work. This is actually tracking all of the little tiny pieces, all the different milestones that have to be reached within governance, within finding feasibility, within site selection, all these different pieces for your internal leadership planning team, okay? And I'll show you a quick example in a moment. So the audience for that is the board, any hired staff, and any highly involved owner volunteers, or like maybe heading up a committee. It is utilized to coordinate all the work. So it is really a board tool. As the board of a startup food co-op, you are a working board, as we've talked about, not just a governing board. So you are overseeing the project as a whole, the trying to get a co-op open, co-op grocery store open, as well as developing the co-op, growing the ownership, all of that good stuff. So this is the board's tool for a startup food co-op, that internal timeline. If you were an open food co-op and you guys were looking at a second store, an expansion, whatever, that internal timeline would be the general manager's tool. The board would have visual access into it to know what's going on, but it would be more the manager's tool, maybe their project manager and their key management staff. But because you're a startup, that internal timeline is actually the board's tool. You are heading up all of the development of your food co-op on all the different levels. Then there's a second kind of timeline, and that's the public timeline. So this is a lot less detailed. It sticks to the really big milestones, kind of describing the very large chunks of work that have to be done. And the audience is your entire community. It is your owners, your members, but also just stakeholders of any kind throughout the community, potential vendors, potential lenders. This is the one that you're showing publicly to kind of make people understand on a higher level what is going on. Our session today, where's my little pointer? Okay. Our session today is going to focus on public timelines, the tool that we just built that you can utilize and put your own information into for your co-op. This is a public timeline. So we're going to go a lot more into what is a public timeline, what goes into a public timeline. We're not going to necessarily talk so much about internal timelines today. I'll give you a quick example, though. This is what I'm talking about with an internal timeline. Some of you have probably seen this template, maybe utilized it, or have something of your own. But an internal timeline, like I said, it's got 3 different areas of governance: board leadership, feasibility and planning, vision, vision and staffing. So overseeing staff, it has 3 whole columns for ownership, your owner loan campaign, events you're throwing, messaging, and then you get into the whole capital, and there's a section for your site. So it's very, very detailed, and it goes month by month. And can I ask anyone who is not muted to mute? Thanks so much. So it goes month by month through your project, through all the stages. And when filled out, even if you're in stage 1, we should be able to sketch in enough details to get a pretty good feel of how long it will take to open your co-op. Ideally, if everything went right. And certainly if you're in stage 2A, you can utilize a timeline like this to put in all the pieces of work and see where they're going to, how they're going to affect each other, where they're going to land, and get a loose sense of how long it would take to open if everything goes according to plan. So it's a very comprehensive tool. It's very detailed. Hopefully you're using something like this if you're in stage 2A or later. If you are not, and you're looking for a template for something like this, or maybe even a phone call conversation to go through a template like this and how your co-op would set it up, absolutely email me or drop a note in the chat and just let me know that you would like the template for the internal timeline, and I can send that along to your co-op as well. Ideally, you have this internal timeline set up before we go to the public timeline, because one should be built off the other. The public timeline is kind of a reflection of the big pieces of what's going on in the internal timeline. It's not absolutely mandatory. We can set up a public timeline or a little bit of one, and we'll talk about why, without the internal timeline, but it's going to make it a lot simpler, and it's going to make your communication more consistent. So it's actually tying to what you're really actually doing right now. Because while the early stages of co-op development, stage 1, stage 2A, are pretty consistent among startup food co-ops, there are some real variances that do start to show up after a bit, especially in 2B, depending on how you're planning to fund your project, sometimes depending on the type of site you're working with, there can be real variability. So we are going to want to make sure it is specified to your project if you're further along. But we're going to show you a version that is really based off of, I need folks to mute, please. Thanks so much. And great, I saw a lot of people requesting the internal timeline. I will get that doc to you guys. Give me a day or 2. You should have it within a day or 2. But we can build the public timeline based off of the general concepts of what happens in each stage of development. And that's what we're going to look at today. And then we'll talk a little bit about how you can really get more detailed and more specified to make it specific to your co-op. If you guys are further along, that timeline needs to be very specific to your co-op, especially if you're like stage 2B or further. And so this tool, can you still utilize it? Yes, but it is something that you're going to need to get very detailed in there. And if you're in stage 3, the exact tool we're about to show you may not be the right tool for you, but the concepts are the same. And I can actually show you an example from a stage 3 co-op if you want to reach out, that it is more like, because once you're in stage 3, we have the site, we're under construction maybe, or about to be, then we can get a lot more detailed about what happens in each of the stages till open. That's a little different than what we're going to show today. Okay. Any comments or questions so far? I see a lot of people asking for the template. I will definitely send that to y'all. It looks like we might want to have a session on that type of template, that type of timeline as well. There seems to be a lot of interest, so duly noted. Any questions though before we jump into what a public timeline is? Okay. Oh, I see something in the chat. Oh, just sending that internal timeline. Okay, will do. Excellent. Okay, so now we're going to pivot. We were talking about this big internal timeline, really detailed. And it's a wonderful tool, by the way, for organizing your projects and getting everyone on the same page who is working on the internal pieces of the project. We're going to pivot now to goals of to a public timeline. So what are the goals of a public timeline? Remember, our audience on this is our owners or members, whichever term you use. It is the general community, any stakeholders whatsoever who's not super involved in the actual development work of building the co-op. Okay, so that's our audience, and we don't want it to be too detailed. We're going to talk about the goals, though. The number one goal of your public timeline is actually to educate your owners in your community on what it takes to build a cooperative grocery store. If you have a well-built public timeline, it's a really helpful tool as a board member when people go, well, why don't we have this yet? Or why can't we do that? Or what's going on with this, to point to it and go, we got to get all this done. This is what it takes to open a startup food co-op. So we're here and we've got all of these stages left to go. We'd love to have your help. But it's not just to make your life easier because you can point to it and show people what's going on and kind of move them on. It's also because the more educated your community and your owners are about that this is a big project and it has these steps and these things we got to get done, the more they're educated on that, the more they get it, they buy in, they're like, okay, this takes time, there's things we need to do. It shows them how that they might need to step up and give a hand, but it makes them understand you are not gifting them a food co-op. So something that Bill Gessner, if any of you knew him, who was kind of one of the founding fathers of the modern startup food co-op movement, always said is you can't give people a food co-op. And I loved that actually Malik Yakini from Detroit Peoples did a presentation called that in our last FCI Live, pointing back to this. But we can't give people a food co-op. That it often feels to people like that is what you're doing. You're this mystical team off far, far away somewhere, even though you're like, we're a bunch of volunteers who live down the street, but it feels like that to them. And you're doing stuff and you've promised them a food co-op. That's how they feel about it, because they don't understand what it takes. They don't understand that we as a community have invested through going through these steps together to build a strong, healthy food co-op. So having this public timeline and using it in your social media, using it in your newsletter, bringing it up repeatedly, putting it on, printing out version and putting it on your table every time you publicly table, doing this repeatedly helps people understand that we as a community have signed up to build a food co-op, and there's a lot of work that has to be done. Now, I'm not saying it'll make more people volunteer, because I don't know about that, to actually do the work, but it will make them understand you're not just like, well, why haven't you opened the co-op yet? Well, we can't just gift you a co-op. It doesn't work like that. Here's all the steps we have to go through to make sure we can open our food co-op and be successful. So it is number one, above all else, an educational tool. Next, it does help set expectations. And I spelled that with two E's and two X's. Sorry about that on the slide. You knew what I meant. It's close to the education piece, but it actually is a little different, which is just, again, this kind of goes back to the people who have unrealistic expectations. Understandably, in our culture, we're just used to people announcing we're going to get a blank, a Kroger's, and then 6 months later we have a Kroger's and I don't do anything about it, right? And even when it's like a couple months from now, we're going to have a community center. Well, the city's handling that, or the park district. We don't have realistic expectations sometimes of what a community developed project will look like and take when we are building it together. So the timeline sets realistic expectations of what can be done. I often, when pointing to one of these public timelines, people will be like, all of that, well, this. I'm like, well, see, this is what's done for every grocery store that's ever opened. But when Kroger announces they've already done all of this work except for this last piece here, and we're doing this piece together. But it gives a sense too, if we're at 300 owners and we need to be at 1,200 owners before we can even start to finance the project, they get a little more of a realistic concept of what's going to happen. Now, I know that doesn't answer the people are frustrated, they want their store now part, but hopefully it helps them understand why you're not just rushing through it and there are things that need to be done. The other really important goal of your public timeline is creating a sense of ownership. You need true sense of ownership from your owners, from members, whichever term you use, and from your community at large into this food co-op, that we are building it together, that we are doing this. We need that community pride and investment, or we don't get open. We don't get funded because we don't get the momentum and that sense of like, yeah, this thing is going to work. We don't get enough owners, and we don't get them to come in the door after we open. They have to feel like we're doing this, even if, most of the people on this call are the ones doing 90% of the work. We as a community, though, are really opening this. And that sense of ownership is not going to come if they don't know what is going on and what it takes. So when you show them a good public timeline, it feels like seeing the curtain pulled back on the project. Like, oh, weird, and not like, well, then we have to do like us, the board, like we have to then accomplish this as a community. The board will be leading us through, but showing them, hey, this is what's happening behind the curtain, makes them feel like, we're doing this. I get what's going on. This isn't just some company coming in and doing something. This isn't, we're doing this. That sense of inclusion creates a lot of buy-in. And people don't want every graphic detail, not the big internal timeline. They don't have time or energy to learn all that, right? If you heard about some great new project in your community and invested $100 or $200 in a share, you wouldn't necessarily have time to, or even want to, read the detailed internal timeline of every task that needs to get done. But you do want to know kind of what's going on in this project you're supporting. We kind of want it at that level, right? We don't want it overly detailed, but we don't want to make people feel excluded, which happens a lot at startup food co-ops kind of by accident, that we're so busy with the work of trying to get all these things to happen that a lot of people don't understand what's happening. They don't feel like they know what's going on. And that can be frustrating. So, well, our newsletter said, yeah, but if we don't simplify the message like a public timeline does, so it's easy to digest, and then repeat that and make that digestible information in many ways and keep utilizing the same tool to kind of update them and explain what's going on, it just doesn't uptake, right? We've all got a lot of things going on. So a public timeline really helps with that. I have it down here with a question mark. Is the public timeline meant to get people excited and involved and engaged? I'd actually argue, not really. and people always give me a funny look when I say that. The public timeline is about realistically looking at what it takes to open a grocery store together as a community. It's about setting those expectations, making people feel included, understanding the work, really understanding what we're doing together. Getting them rah, excited and involved, that's for all the rest of your messaging, okay? This is an educational tool. So if you look at it and you're like, well, owners are going, well, there's a lot to do. It's not actually a bad response. I'm okay with the public timeline getting that response. It is a lot to do. You are taking on something pretty epic as a community. There is a lot to get done and it won't open tomorrow. Those are true messages. And if we have to create enthusiasm and excitement for our food co-op by being dishonest about that, you're not opening your co-op anyway, because that's not a true story, right? The true story is it will take years. The true story is it will take a lot of work and a lot of steps. If we can't sell that story and get people engaged in that story and really wanting to build a food co-op the way it actually will go, then we're not going to get open anyway. What's going to happen is they're going to look at you and go, well, you promised me a grocery store, and you keep telling them just the happy parts and the exciting parts, and we definitely want to tell them about the vision and what it could do for our community. We want all that. But if we're only selling them that, they're like, okay, I want the toy now. That's just a normal human reaction. The public timeline is not the tool for enthusing people about your mission and vision. That's a different piece of work that you're doing all the time. This is an educational tool to make sure they understand where we're going and that we're doing it together, and it's a lot. The fact that it's going to pay off in really powerful, exciting ways, that gets communicated elsewhere. Okay, now pause for a second. Any comments or questions? Okay, I don't see anything in the chat, so I'll keep going. All right, so what will a public timeline look like? I have put up a quick snapshot of the tool that Melanie is going to be walking you through in depth in our second half of our session. So there's a lot of different ways to do a public timeline. Okay, this is one, and I'm going to show you some examples from a few peers. This is what Melanie came up with. And by the way, Melanie, if you don't know Melanie Shalato personally from Firebrand, Melanie was the board chair of Green Top Grocery and helped open that store. So knows this process intimately while also being a professional graphic designer and brand manager. So brand designer. And so this was her taking everything she remembered and everything she's heard me talk about and build it into something that could communicate what needs to happen. Now notice, there's only 4, 5, 6 bullet points under each stage of development. These are milestones. These are not, and then we do this, and then we do that, and then this will happen. These are the major milestones of what we need to accomplish. So if you're in stage 2A, you know it's a heck of a lot more than a financial pro forma is created. We assess the community capacity for actually building a food co-op, and we double ownership from stage 1, and the board votes that the store is feasible based on the pro forma community assessment and market study and moves us forward. That is clearly not all the work that happens in stage 2A, but it is the major milestones, at least for this possible co-op. Yours could be slightly different, and that's why we've made it as a template that you can update and adjust. But on average, those are some of the normal major milestones of stage 2A feasibility. We are not, so we're like, well, yeah, but 2A, that stage could go on for 2, 3 years. And, we just keep pointing to that and say, we're still doing this. Yes, and that's where your newsletter is going to come in and your social media and your annual meetings. You're updating them on what pieces of that you're doing and what else you're accomplishing in the community, because it will be more things going on than just these 4 bullet points, but these will be the major things that have to get done in that stage for us to keep moving. And you'll see throughout each one, we've got some of the standard. These are very standardized major milestones of each stage. They will shift and adjust depending on your project. So stage 2B, it is usually the general manager search starts, and that should be pretty much for everyone. But are you completing plans for the owner loan drive that has to kick off when you announce the site? Depends. These days, most food co-ops still use an owner loan program, but not all. So for some of you, that would not be in here. That would not be listed. And okay, so I'll pause for a few questions in just a second because a bunch of them in the chat. And then you'll see the ownership bar on the left. So this is estimating how many owners you'll have at each stage. And it's estimating back from how many owners you expect to need to have at open. For those of you who have not yet done your financial pro forma, you may not have this number. You can just remove this bar and just show them the actual stages that you're going through. If you have a financial pro forma, it should project how many owners and how much owner equity you need to have it open. And so we can kind of build backwards from there. This is also adjustable. So you can remove it. You can change the numbers. You can change what number each box is at. So we're not focusing on how many owners, because that piece honestly can shift sometimes, depending how far along you are in the project. It can shift a little here or there. We're focusing on talking about what are the major things that we need to do, what will be going on. And then I've added, it's not in the template, but you can absolutely add it. I've added an arrow showing people like, hey, this is where we are. And of course, you'll want to have talking points to talk more about what's going on within those different pieces right now. Again, those should show up in the newsletter. You should have them with you in your tabling and so forth. But you can see the kind of big picture idea of there are steps. We need to go through these reasonable steps, and these are things we will probably be getting done in each one. All right, I'm going to stop for a second here and look at our questions in the chat. Could you talk about why progress is measured by owners? I've heard it includes demonstrates community support, enough people to finance the owner loan campaign. Yeah, I can talk for just a second about that, Pramil. It's a great question. I'm actually about to point out in the next slide that we've moved away from measuring it just in owner numbers. Not that we don't at all, but we have moved away from measuring it in just that. And there's some pitfalls, and I'll talk about them in the next slide. But the reason why is we have actually seen repeatedly startup food co-ops open that had great market studies, that were in communities that could clearly support a food co-op and this typical kind of co-op community, pretty store. They opened it up, and we have seen them actually fail because they had way too few owners. And you're like, what? Just that? Owners represent something else. Owners don't actually represent shoppers, by the way. It may be a surprising number and it's very off the cuff, but from what we've seen, maybe 50% of your pre-store opening owners will actually shop in the store, maybe. And so you're like, well, then it's not for that. What's it about? Actually, owner count shows actually community capacity to support and want a food co-op. What it shows is actually enough people in the community know about the co-op, are interested in the co-op, actually want the co-op. It represents so much more than future shoppers. And if we can't get owners, we are basically selling a vision that doesn't resonate or hasn't permeated the community. People don't know about it. And if they don't know about it, and they haven't bought into your vision or don't like your vision even, and you can measure that more in lack of response than people telling you that to your face, then you have a much bigger problem and your store will not succeed when you open. So what ownership numbers really measure is if the community really has the desire to support and grow and know about and are invested in the vision of having this grocery store. That's what it's all about. Okay, and oh, there are a lot of challenges that come in stage 3 and 2B. I am Janet, we're not going to get into that today, but we can talk offline. So
Okay.
the slide.
It's about people jumping ahead, I guess, is the real question.
Oh, okay. I'll touch on that in a second then. I want to see what the rest of my questions are, but I will touch on that. Let's see what else we got here. Something about our website. Yes, you absolutely can put this on your website after you customize it. Okay, I'm going to go to Janet's question then. So yes, first off, you can completely customize this. After you've customized it, you can put it on your website, in your newsletter, on your social media, all of that. And if you need help customizing it to your co-op, you can reach out to me at jq@fci.coop, and we can set a time to work through that together. Janet's question is, what happens when your co-op jumps some of the milestones that should have been met? It's a really different question. It's not a lot about how to use a public timeline, but yes, basically you will have to go back and catch up. If you don't, it will have cumulative effects as you keep going. So sometimes people move way forward with the site, but their ownership numbers are here. Sometimes their ownership numbers are here, but the site work is way behind. Sometimes they've committed to a site in stage 1. We've seen that after they do the feasibility work doesn't really fit with the direction that they're moving or isn't financially sustainable. If major milestones are skipped, they have to be gone back and fixed, or you will continue to see more cracks that open further and further as you go along, for sure. All right. I'm going to show you a couple examples from peers that look a little different. This is what our template looks like. We made it so it was easy for everyone to adjust and adapt to their co-op. So that means it's got a little bit of a generic look. So we'll show you what some peers have done. This is a public timeline from Prairie Food Co-op in Lombard, Illinois, that will get opened in spring of next year. They have their site and they're in the midst of hiring their GM. So, they did this years ago. This is an old one. And we used to, this goes back to Permeel's question, we used to tie very closely each stage of development to the number of owners. And so you see they've got, we'll do an owner design survey at 600 owners. We'll sign a lease at 800 owners. We'll do a capital campaign at 1,000 owners. And these were very viable numbers at the time in the community they're in with the goals they had, the size store they had. And you can do this, but what we have found is the hang up, the trip up with this. And this was us advising them to do this, by the way. So this is something we've learned over the years from all you all, is that sometimes these numbers need to shift. And if you're not pretty far along, then you have to go back and shift. So let's say find out, well, you're a co-op that's going to do an owner capital campaign with a community that has capacity to make loans to you and to the project, and you're doing it and you realize, oh, well, the store is going to cost more than we thought, another $500,000. And so we're going to need, 1.2 million in owner loans rather than $1 million or whatever it is. And we know that it takes so many owners to fund so much money in a typical capital campaign. So you'll need to move from 1,000 owners when you launch your capital campaign to 1,200, let's say. And now people are like, but you've been saying 1,000, or you said 800. And this is a most classic one. At 800 owners, we'll sign a lease. You said that. You said we'd do that. And then it doesn't happen because you couldn't find a viable site in time. But everyone is just hung up on that 800 owners number. So we don't recommend doing it based on just the owner number anymore, although this is a very attractive graphic. One other one I want to show you real quick before we get into the tool. This is a public timeline that was done by Bay City Cooperative Market. I really like this one. Notice that they visually showed which ones are marked off and have been done in a really fun way, like that little counter. That's really helpful. So that's kind of cool. But I also like they tied in a few fun owner facing things, and you can do this as well. So in their case, they're like, they knew because they were just finishing this number 2, right? So they knew they wanted to get to X hundred owners, before, and then they wanted to do something kind of to celebrate it. They were very early on. And they said, well, when we get to 200 owners, we're going to make yard signs and do a yard sign blitz and get them to all our owners all over town and have a big event. And that was a fun thing to add in because they were so far away from actually opening the store. They added in, and I've seen other startups do this, add in like 1 or 2 fun things like, hey, when we get to 600 owners, we're going to have a big, one of them I think was going to have a big like community party and fundraiser, where we'll reveal some possible site designs, as in like our store's gonna be 6,000 square feet, and here's what that could look like. Here's some other stores that look like that. So if you have the opportunity to fold in some fun stuff that will happen as well at certain owner counts, that can be very motivating in the public as well. So it is another way you can do this and an option to add a little bit of that in. I'm going to, unless there's any major questions, is there any questions right now before I turn over to Melanie to walk you through how to utilize the tool at your co-op? Actually, the actual graphic design tool. Okay. All right, Melanie, I am ready to hand it over to you to walk us through.
All right, great. I'm going to share my screen. All right. Is that working for everybody? Awesome. Okay. So I don't know how many of you have worked extensively in Google, basically it's Google's version of PowerPoint. If you have not, it is basically PowerPoint. Some things are a little different in sometimes some frustrating ways, but it does remain probably the easiest way to share out something that everyone can update without having to have a subscription to expensive layout software and things like that. So as you're working on this, just kind of keep in the back of your mind, it's kind of like PowerPoint. How would PowerPoint do the thing that I'm needing it to do? So that's the best tip I can give you. Real basically, we've got the first slide right here, and this slide is set up to an 11 inches by 8.5. So it is a standard sheet of paper, and you should be able to, I've made sure there's no bleeds, so you should be able to print it out on a standard printer if you need to. There is a page 2 on here, a second slide that you will not want to print in all probability. But what it is sort of just some very basic instructions in case you just need a little refresher of the stuff that we're going to talk about right here. That is a page 2. But if you go to print, just make sure you're printing this one and not the instructions. So the most simplified way to talk about this is that there's the elements that are here in the document that you're able to edit directly in the document. And then there is this piece, which is technically sort of a background element, which is where we've got the owners. And this number of owners chart is actually a linked chart that is in a separate document. And I'm gonna show you how to do that here in a minute. But the easy stuff is this. When you click on these shapes, you will see that just like in PowerPoint, you can go up here to your little fill color and you can make it your own brand colors. You're able to add your custom colors. You can see right here, I've got a purple and a green, or you can add and type in the hex color of your brand colors. So that way this can work with all of your other social media, all of your other brand stuff, and on your website. So all of these elements, this has got a little outline of purple, again, same way. and you'll be able to update all of those things. The other thing that you're definitely going to want to update is the logo down here. Now I've dropped in the FCI logo just as a placeholder because one of the cool things that you can do in Google Sheets, I like it anyway, is if you click on an item that's an image, it gives you the option to replace the image. And so it'll drop into the same little text box, so it's roughly positioned where you want, and make that pretty easy. So for instance, if we want to replace this with your own logo, chances are you're going to upload it from your computer, but there are, of course, other options. But we're going to upload from my computer, and I'm going to take you to Green Tops because that's what I have very easy access to, and it will drop in and fit right here. Now, as you can see, it's being cropped because it's a little wider than the FCI. And if you double click, you're going to see that it exists out here, and you can just take this, stretch this box to get the whole logo in, and then you can scale it down to fit within the border. So you can, like I say, if your logo is a little more square, it's obviously going to fit well in there, as opposed to a variation of your logo that's real long. Hopefully you've got it in both ways, but that is, and you can still move it around and get it the way you want. So easy way to adjust that. These are also just simple boxes. And so like JQ pointed out on one of those earlier examples, if you wanted to color these a little bit differently and say, well, we haven't gotten to this one yet, you can just come in here and you can edit those colors nice and easy, and sort of gray out the ones that maybe you haven't gotten to yet. That is easy to do. And again, make it your own brand colors so it looks nice. Also, when it comes to, I'm going to blow this up a little bit here. One of the things that I actually wasn't terribly happy with about slides was the ability to like check these boxes. So these are a chosen bullet point. And if you're going to print this out on a printer to have there at your table for your display, honestly, the easiest way to do it is just to then take a Sharpie and fill these in, just physically marker in there and fill in the boxes. However, if you're using it for social media, or you want to have it up on your website, it wasn't quite as simple to do. So my solution to this was to, on the second page where there's all these instructions, I gave you a little cheat box over here. And the idea is if you select it and copy it, you would actually be able to paste it into place. So I select it, I hit Command C, I come over here, I should be able to, all right, cooperate. Now watch, it's going to make a liar out of me. I had it working. There it is, little box. Drag it over it, mark it out. There may be other ways about that. I was just trying to keep it fairly simple. But this is how you can go through, Option Shift, drag it up, fill as many as you want, and check those off. So that was a solution. I also, if you prefer the X marks the spot, you can use those instead. Paste it in here, drop it in, and call it done. So there's different ways you can go about doing that. Those are the main things. Obviously, of course, you can click in here and type whatever you need. This was sort of pre-populated with some stuff that made sense, but obviously yours is going to vary. And then the last thing, probably the thing that's, I don't want to say the trickiest, because it's not really, but it's the most unusual. So this background number here, that's a chart. You'll notice when you click on this, that this little thing pops up here in the upper right corner, this little link, and there's a down arrow. And if you click on the down arrow, it's going to give you the option to open the source. So we're going to do that. That is the source of the chart. And when we open it, it's going to bring up an entirely different tab, entirely different document. And when that document opens, you're going to see, ta-da, there is that same little chart that's been brought in. So if you click on that, it reveals these little 3 buttons up in the upper corner. So see there, 3 little buttons. And this gives you the opportunity to edit that chart. So when you click on the edit, suddenly you've got all of the criteria for editing those charts. So this is basic setup. You want vertical axis if you're going to mess with the owner count. And all you would have to do is change this to 1800, and you'll notice that it changes over here. So we're going to make that 1800. And then we are going to, and Google, automatically updates. And I can't get to my tab because of all of the Zoom nonsense. All right. And when you come back to your main thing, you're going to see there's something new has shown up. It's going to say, oh, there's been an update. Do you want us to go ahead and update that? And when you click that, now it has shifted to 1800. So it still fits. You don't have to resize it. Everything is scaled in there. Yeah, it's just as easy as that. There are some faint grid lines that I'm not sure if it's showing up on video, but I'll blow it up here. You can see the grid lines. And we use those grid lines here if it's 1400, and you can just resize these boxes as needed to match those grid lines, and the text will move and everything should fit pretty seamlessly. So
Melanie, we have a quick question on the just seems fit here is what if they don't want to use the owner piece, the owner timeline piece at all? How do they just remove that aspect?
If you don't think you're ever going to need it at all, you can simply unlink it, and then it is just a freestanding graphic and you can hit delete.
Okay. So unlink it and then click on it and delete it.
Yep. So just unlink and delete, and it is gone.
Got it.
And then I guess you would want to delete this as well and stretch this header over,
Excellent. Yep. Let's stretch that over.
Yep. And it'll all center and you can rename it however you want.
Excellent. Any other questions on how to use the actual template, like on the design technical level? Okay. Thank you, Melanie. You made it so clear and clean. I think everyone understood that.
or I've blown their minds and they're like checked out. There's also a little spot down here. I guess I should point this out. This one's really simple, but the box down here just has a little bit of a narrative. It's been pre-populated. Obviously, you can write your own. And then I made this magenta so you'd see a spot for you to add your co-op's name. Just one more place of customization. So
excellent. We will be
sending
out the link. I saw the question. We're sending out the link for the template. It actually will be auto emailing to you 1 minute after the end of the session. So that will be coming out.
Oh, but there is one more thing, JQ. I'm so sorry to interrupt. But this is important. This is important. This, of course, Google Drive, and the link we send out only for everybody so that no one goes in and edits this main document. What you will have to do is you come up here and you will make a copy, and you will make a copy of your entire presentation. That means you'll get the instruction sheet as opposed to just a single sheet. So when you make the entire presentation a copy, you will be given the option of where you want to put that. And you'll want to save it to your own personal drive. And once you do that, that copy on your drive will be fully editable, just like I've done here. So when you get in there and you're trying to mess with it and it won't let you, that's because you haven't made your own copy. So you'll need to do that. And then I promised I would show you how to save it out, and I almost failed to do that. So once you've made it the way you want, you'll come again over here to File, and you will be able to download. And here's where you can choose PDF if you are going to want to print it out, have it as a printable piece, and it will give you again a place to share that into your own hard drive. Or you will go to download and you can choose a JPEG or a PNG and be able to do that. And again, when you choose JPEG, you're going to get the option. It's only going to do the current slide. So when you make sure you're not on this page, when you hit export JPEG, or you're going to get this. Make sure you're on this page, and then choose your JPEG or PNG to be able to put that on your website or on social media. I promise, JQ, that's it. No more interrupting.
No, you're good. You're good. Please do. And I love that, just in case any of you are newer to this stuff, I'm just pointing out the JPEG or PNG is what you're going to need to use it on social media. So the PDF is like, if you want a copy that's 8.5 by 11, you can print off easily. Okay, so if you're like, I want to use this as a graphic in my newsletter, you want it to be a JPEG or a PNG. Am I correct there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything that's going to be used online, JPEG or PNG is the best. PDF is going to allow this piece to export in a way that if you send it to your local Kinko's and say, I actually want this 200% to be a big poster on my table, it's going to be clear and crisp. You're not going to get it all fuzzy. So PDF is the way to go. That's what your printer is going to want.
Oh, I didn't know that. So if you want to make a big poster out of it, PDF, awesome. And I love that. So, and it will size up really well. Good.
Yep. The only thing at question will be the quality of your logo that you put in. I have no control over that. So upload a nice quality logo and it should be just as crisp as everything else when it prints.
Excellent. Okay. Any other questions or comments on the technical side of this? Okay. All right, Melanie, I'm gonna steal the screen back and talk through a few more things in a second. But so in utilizing this, what questions came when you saw this? You're like, oh, you know, we're gonna update this for my co-op. Did any questions arise? Anything about like how, you know, how do I customize this for us? And I don't mean the technical side now. Now I mean the information on it, how I utilize it. Any comments, questions, or thoughts on that? It's a big group today, but it's a quiet one. Or we just did a killer good job. All right. Well then, I think everyone understood it. I have no problem with that then. Couple of quick things I want to go over with y'all today, and then we'll get started. So I want to actually thank Bay City and Prairie Roots for sharing these with us. They're beautiful versions. Those will be in the slides in the video. You will get an email right at 1 minute after the top of the hour that will have the link to the template Melanie just walked you through that she created for us through Firebrand Cooperative. So that will be available to you, available to all co-ops with the instructions and everything. The other one I showed you, we go back to the big internal timeline. That's not something that we're planning to send out, but I will be emailing it to you. That one might take another day or so for you to get that. And I just want to real quick, first of all, just thank Melanie so much for being here and being a part of the session. And hope you're going to join us tonight. The West Georgia Farmers Cooperative will be with us. This is a really empowering story, really interesting story. This is an existing Black-led farmers cooperative from the 1960s, been thriving for decades, that has decided to take it a step further and build their own grocery store as well as grow their own food. It's going to be a really great story, a lot to learn from it. Please do join us. Tomorrow, more on this communicating side. Content calendars make the magic happen. Rachel Dominguez-Benner of Rachel DB Creative will be here. You guys have asked, how do we keep the social media working and flowing? You're going to be talking to an expert who did the social media for the very successful Gem City Market and how to create a content calendar to make sure you're communicating in a way that keeps your co-op moving on social media. And then we also have tomorrow, Challenges and Innovation in Rural Grocery. I'm really excited to have Erica Blair from Rural Grocery Initiative here with us, talking about some really exciting, innovative, big changes coming out of small town rural groceries, some of them cooperative, some of them not, and how that movement has everything to do with where our movement's going and the potential success and future of independent grocery. So hope you'll join us for that. Thank you again to our sponsors who have made the summer 2023 FCI Live Series possible, especially National Cooperative Grocers. Thank you all so much for joining us. If anyone has to stay and ask any additional questions,